connecting to the SpaceX Dragon Freedom that is housed at the moment on the zenith or space-facing side of the Harmony module. It is through that passageway that NASA astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore, along with NASA astronaut Nick Hague, the Dragon commander, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov will be floating through a short time from now, closing the hatch behind them and making final preparations for their undocking from the International Space Station that is scheduled at 12:05 a.m. Central Time, 1:05 a.m. Eastern Time, the home stretch for Williams and Wilmore to complete an extended 9.5-month mission in space. Thank you for joining us this evening. This is a momentous night to begin the journey home for Crew-9. Williams and Wilmore, having launched back on June 5th on a Boeing Starliner spacecraft, propulsion system issues resulted in a decision by NASA to bring Williams and Wilmore home on the SpaceX Dragon Freedom spacecraft. Crew-9, that meaning Hague and Gorbunov, launched with 2 empty seats aboard Freedom back in late September, clearing the way for Williams and Wilmore to join them on the ride home, the beginning of which will occur just about 2 hours and 12 minutes from now with the undocking of Freedom from that space-facing port on the Harmony module. At the time that the Dragon splashes down in the Gulf of America off the Gulf Coast late Tuesday afternoon, Williams and Wilmore will have spent 286 days in space, 285 of which aboard the International Space Station. They will have completed 4,576 orbits of the Earth in a mission spanning 121.3 million statute miles. Hague and Gorbunov's, their mission duration, 171 days, 170 days of which aboard the International Space Station. Their mission will have spanned 2,736 orbits of the Earth, 72.5 million statute miles. The Crew-9 departing crew, they have donned their garments, their undergarments, if you will. Nick Hague, just off on the right side of your screen. They will be assisted through that hatchway to close the hatch behind them. That hatch closure expected about 30 minutes, perhaps a bit less than that.
Freedom, Houston, on 2, standby for big loop audio config.
Copies, and I'll need 2 minutes before I can do a comm check.
We copy.
Spacecraft communicator Tess Caswell here in Mission Control in Houston, part of the Orbit 3 team, who will be talking to the crew members as they complete the hatch closure and then subsequently the undocking of the International Space Station. She is part of that Orbit 3 team that is led by Flight Director Marcos Flores tonight. He is the lead flight director for the Crew-9 mission. In the foreground, popping in and out of the field of view, is NASA astronaut Anne McClain, the commander of the Dragon Endurance that automatically docked to the forward port of the Harmony module in the wee hours of Sunday morning to initiate about 1+ days of handover activities with the Crew-9 crew. The abbreviated handover was specifically designed to provide as many undocking opportunities as possible for Crew-9. The decision to bring the Crew-9 crew back to Earth on Tuesday was dictated by what is forecast to be pristine weather conditions at the various landing sites in the Gulf of America that the Dragon Freedom will be coming home to late Tuesday afternoon, with splashdown scheduled at 4:57 p.m. Central Time, 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time. Nick Hague, the commander of the Dragon Freedom, floating through the hatchway. We will see Williams and Wilmore shortly as they are completing their suit-up activities. The final suit-up will take place once the 4 crew members are inside Dragon and the hatch is closed between Dragon and the International Space Station. The station hatch on that side of the docking interface will be closed after the Dragon hatch is closed. Wilmore and Williams have performed informal suit and seat fit checks on orbit using 2 spare suits on the International Space Station. The SpaceX team supported this effort and gathered data to make an informed decision on the suits that they would wear on the ride home and the seat sizing. A new suit was actually flown up for Butch Wilmore on the Crew-9 mission that arrived on the station at the end of September. Wilmore and Williams also performed suit donning and doffing activities to familiarize themselves with the suits and with Dragon systems during the handover between Crew-8 and Crew-9 back in September. And this is not a new activity for Williams and Wilmore. They actually were aboard in those suits during a port relocation that transferred the Freedom spacecraft, the Dragon Freedom, from the forward port of Harmony to the zenith port of Harmony back in November. Once Williams, Wilmore, Hague, and Gorbunov depart the International Space Station just over 2 hours from now, the 7 crew members left aboard the International Space Station will continue the Expedition 72 increment, led by the commander of the station, Roscosmos cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov, joined by his cosmonaut colleagues Ivan Wagner and Kirill Peskov, Peskov having just arrived on the station as part of Crew 10. Also continuing on in orbit, NASA astronauts Anne McClain, Nicole Ayers, and Don Pettit, and Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi. Don Pettit will be coming home in late April, April 19th, in fact, U.S. time, on the Soyuz MS-26 spacecraft that he rode to orbit in, along with Ovchinin and Wagner from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. The International Space Station is currently flying 260 miles above the Earth, currently crossing the southeastern coast of Africa, moving in a trajectory from northwest to southeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. At the SpaceX Mission Control Room in Hawthorne, California, the SpaceX flight controllers are reporting that all of Freedom's systems are in excellent shape. Nick Hague there, as you see on your screen, stowing some last-minute items aboard the Dragon spacecraft that he is commanding from undocking through splashdown. The weather has been monitored for the splashdown sites in the Gulf of America throughout the day. The reports continue to be that the weather is forecast to be excellent for Dragon's homecoming on Tuesday afternoon. From the time of undocking through splashdown, it's a fairly short phasing, as they term the ballistics end of the operation, about 17 hours of transit between the time the Dragon will undock from the International Space Station and the time it will splash down. Again, splashdown off the coast of Florida in the Gulf is scheduled for 4:57 p.m. Central Time, 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday afternoon. We should be seeing Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore shortly. At the time of splashdown, predicted to be Tuesday afternoon, Williams, again, will have logged 286 days in space on this, her third flight, and a total of 608 days in space, the second most by any American astronaut, right behind Peggy Whitson, who has 675 days in space on her bio. Butch Wilmore, with his 286 days in space at the time of splashdown tomorrow, on this, his third flight, will have logged 464 days in space. Nick Hague, wrapping up his third mission with 171 days in space, will have a total of 374 days in space, to his credit. And again, Aleksandr Gorbunov of Roscosmos ending his first flight into space with a splashdown tomorrow and a total of 171 days on his biography. We are moving into a brief handover between satellites on the Tracking and Data Relay Satellite System. There you see a view of us here in Mission Control in Houston at the Johnson Space Center in the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Once again, the flight director in charge of tonight's operation is Marcos Flores, the lead flight director for Crew-9, joined on console by spacecraft communicator Tess Caswell, whose voice you will hear talking to the crew periodically during the time frame between now and hatch closure, and then between hatch closure and undocking, through the time that the Freedom spacecraft leaves what is called the approach ellipsoid. Basically, I term it the neighborhood of the International Space Station, at which point integrated operations between the Johnson Space Center and Hawthorne will come to an end, and it will all be in Hawthorne's hands to bring the crew home.
SpaceX copies LIO unsealed at 0258 Zulu. Continue with IMV duct teardown and hatch closure. And Freedom Houston on the big loop. Sounded like a good comm check with SpaceX. At your convenience, we'll take a comm check with us.
And Houston, Freedom's got you loud and clear.
Copy.
With those voice checks between Nick Hague and the SpaceX Mission Control Room in Hawthorne and the Flight Control Room here in Houston, you're seeing Don Pettit and Alexei Ovchinin taking photographs of Butch Wilmore in his entry suit. Suni Williams is in the foreground near the hatchway. Once again, there are two SpaceX Dragons at the International Space Station. The one that the Crew-9 crew will be departing in a couple of hours from now is on the zenith or space-facing port of the Harmony module. The newly arrived Crew-10 crew docked early Sunday morning to the forward port of Harmony in their Dragon Endurance. And you see at the hatchway the four departing Crew-9 crew members posing for some final photos. Final handshakes and hugs between the departing Crew-9 crew members and the crew members who will remain on board the International Space Station, maintaining a continuous human presence on the orbital laboratory that began on November 2nd, 2000. Once again, we're in a brief handover between satellites that provide the downlink TV capability from the station. We'll be regaining that downlink TV just a moment or two from now. You saw the Crew-9, two of the Crew-9 crew members, Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore, already in their entry suits. Nick Hague and Aleksandr Gorbunov will don their suits once inside Dragon. Hague and Gorbunov flew up to the International Space Station back on September 28th. So they're wrapping up a mission almost 6 months in duration. Williams and Wilmore, of course, with their extended mission in the home stretch of a 9.5-month flight spanning 121.3 million statute miles. And now inside Dragon, you see Butch Wilmore on the far left. In the center of your screen, Aleksandr Gorbunov. Nick Hague on the far right. They will settle into their respective seats aboard Freedom as countdown clocks here in Mission Control are ticking backward toward the time of the command to initiate the opening of hooks holding Freedom to its docking port on the space-facing side of the Harmony module. That command to be issued about an hour and 55 minutes from now. The actual physical separation, what we peg as undocking for the history books, is scheduled at 12:05 a.m. Central, 1:05 a.m. Eastern.
SpaceX copies on hatch closure. We'll send a command momentarily to transition the state machine to hatch closed. You can reference your hatch closed event details for a few actions and then complete suit donning per procedure 4.010.
Freedom copies all.
And Nick Hague aboard Freedom confirming that Dragon's hatch to the International Space Station is closed. That call coming at 10:05 p.m. Central Time, 11:05 p.m. Eastern Time. So the Crew-9 crew now safely aboard the Dragon Freedom will complete their suit-up procedures, do systems checks. There will be a series of leak checks between Freedom and the International Space Station at the docking interface. You see Suni Williams on the far right-hand side of your screen. She will be seated next to Nick Hague, the Freedom commander. To Hague's right will be Aleksandr Gorbunov, and you see Butch Wilmore on the far left. The undocking between Freedom and the International Space Station will take Freedom above and behind the orbital laboratory through a series of what are known as departure burns. Freedom then will swing below the space station on a trajectory for the deorbit burn, a 7-minute, 29-second braking maneuver that is scheduled at 4:11 p.m. Central Time on Tuesday afternoon, 5:11 p.m. Eastern Time. That will slow Dragon down by more than 50 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit for its high-speed entry back into the Earth's atmosphere and a parachute-assisted splashdown off the coast of Florida. Once again, the 4 Dragon Freedom crew members you see in this view: Butch Wilmore on the far left, Aleksandr Gorbunov with his back to the camera, Nick Hague just out of the field of view, and Suni Williams on the far right of your screen. The hatch was closed at 10:05 p.m. Central Time, 11:05 p.m. Eastern Time. The station hatch will be closed just a short time from now, enabling a series of leak checks to occur to make sure we have an airtight seal before the pressurization of pressurized mating adapter number 2 can begin. The vestibule will be depressed to vacuum, setting the stage for the initiation of the commanding of the opening of the hooks holding Dragon in place and the physical separation of Dragon from Harmony, with undocking scheduled at 12:05 a.m. Central Time, 1:05 a.m. Eastern Time. If you're just joining us, you're looking live inside the SpaceX Dragon Freedom. The Crew-9 crew all on board. On the far left, Butch Wilmore; on the far right, Suni Williams, who launched back on June 5th aboard a Boeing Starliner spacecraft, returning on Tuesday aboard the Dragon Freedom to complete what will be 286 days in space, 285 of which will have been spent on the International Space Station. Just to put their long-duration mission into context, it is not the longest mission in the history of U.S. spaceflight, the longest single mission. That distinction belongs to NASA's Frank Rubio, who had his mission extended due to a coolant leak on the Soyuz spacecraft that he was launched on from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. A replacement Soyuz was launched by Roscosmos. Rubio came home subsequent to that with a total of 371 days in space. Behind him, Mark Vande Hei, NASA astronaut, logged 355 days in space. Scott Kelly, 340. Christina Cook, 328. And Peggy Whitson, 289. On the far left of your screen, a good view of Dragon with its open nose cap. That nose cone will be closed following Tuesday's deorbit burn as part of the pre-entry procedures. Once again, moving into a quick handover here between satellites on our tracking and data relay satellite system. The Dragon crew all on board. The hatch is closed between Dragon and the International Space Station. The station hatch will be closed a short time from now, and leak checks at the docking interface between the two spacecraft will begin to make sure we have an airtight seal before the small passageway or vestibule, known as pressurized mating adapter number 2, will be ready for depressurization down to vacuum, and the subsequent undocking of Dragon from Harmony's space-facing port about an hour and 47 minutes from now. Looking once again inside Dragon, Butch Wilmore on the left, settling into his seat as the commander of Dragon, veteran NASA astronaut Nick Hague. On the far right of your screen, Suni Williams. Roscosmos cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov is completing a few adjustments to items with his seat. He will don his entry suit just a few moments from now, and all 4 crew members will be positioned, ready for undocking and the beginning of a 17-hour trip back to Earth and a conclusion to this mission. As mentioned earlier, this is not the first time that Wilmore and Williams have been aboard the Dragon Freedom.
SpaceX Freedom, com check from C2.
C2 SpaceX, we have you loud and clear. Help me.
Get you the same. I'm suited and seated, working on Alex, and we'll be finishing up and ready for suit checks here shortly.
SpaceX copies all.
That communication between the spacecraft communicator at SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California, and Dragon's commander Nick Hague. The communications checks continuing. Aleksandr Gorbunov yet to suit up. He will momentarily. As mentioned earlier, Williams and Wilmore, not strangers to the Dragon Freedom. They have practiced suit-up procedures over the course of the past few months and took a ride aboard Freedom for a few minutes back on November 3rd when the spacecraft undocked from the forward port of the Harmony module and relocated to the zenith or space-facing port of the Harmony module. Slightly longer trip for Williams and Wilmore today, a 17-hour journey that will take them to a splashdown off the coast of Florida on Tuesday afternoon at 4:57 p.m. Central Time, 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time. Just to recap, the 4 crew members who are coming home tomorrow aboard the SpaceX Dragon Freedom are all inside Freedom. 3 of the crew members suited up and strapped into their seats. Aleksandr Gorbunov is completing some preparations before he dons his entry suit. The hatch between Freedom and the International Space Station was closed at 10:05 p.m. Central Time, 11:05 p.m. Eastern Time. We are awaiting the closing of the hatch between the International Space Station on that side of the docking interface to permit leak checks to begin and ensure that we have an airtight seal before the vestibule or passageway is depressurized prior to undocking. The Dragon crew members will also undergo leak checks to their suits and further communications checks prior to the undocking itself, which is scheduled about an hour and 41 minutes from now at 12:05 a.m. Central Time, 1:05 a.m. Eastern. So as we stand by for confirmation that the station hatch is closed on that side of the docking interface, that activity to be supervised by Ann McClain, the NASA astronaut and commander of the Dragon Endurance that just arrived at the International Space Station, kicking off a handover period of just over a day between the 2 crews, an abbreviated handover compared to others that have preceded it, that designed to provide this opportunity for undocking, thus maximizing the best weather conditions that were forecast for this coming week, over the next few days. This is our best shot with pristine weather off the coast of Florida to bring the Crew-9 crew home.
Houston Station on 2 for IDA egress.
Go ahead on 2.
We are in step 5.2, and we found some pieces of dust around the hatch seal area, so we are going to clean them with cotton tape.
Copy and concur with the plan.
Japan Aerospace Exploration. Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi newly arrived on the station as part of Crew 10, noticing a few flecks of dust along the hatch seals, so he will clean those off. We want to make sure that there's no foreign object debris at that hatch seal that could compromise the integrity of an airtight seal between pressurized mating adapter number 2 and the interface with the Dragon Freedom. You're looking right across Nick Hague, the commander of the Dragon Freedom, the mission director at SpaceX's Mission Control Room in Hawthorne, reporting back to NASA Flight Director Marcos Flores here in Mission Control in Houston. We're just about ready for suit leak checks.
Waiting for call for 5.3.
Talk, you are go for step 5.3.
Okay, copy. We are go for closing Apex hatch, and I have one question for you.
Go ahead.
Another view of the crew aboard Dragon Freedom looking...
There is one SpaceX bag. It's labeled as unarmed PFD. The bag number is 153, and its carabiner is attached to one of the bungees in PMS3. Can we just leave it as it is?
Checking.
Once again, you're looking at a view across the 4 crew members, Butch Wilmore in the foreground, Aleksandr Gorbunov to his left, then Nick Hague, and just obscured on the far right-hand side of this configuration is Suni Williams.
SpaceX Freedom on the big loop, section 5 complete. We've got everybody suited with successful intercom checks.
SpaceX copies on successful intercom checks. Continue to section 6.
Freedom, welcome.
And in preparation of the leak checks of the 4 suits by the Crew-9 crew members, Butch Wilmore and the others putting their hands in their gloves. Those will be securely zipped in place before the leak checks will begin.
Station Houston on the big loop for the bag.
Go ahead on 2.
We would like you to remove that bag from PMA3 temp stow in node 2, and we will find a permanent home for it after the undock.
Okay, we'll temp stow it in node 2.
SpaceX Freedom on the big loop. Section 6 is complete.
SpaceX copies completion of 4.010.
The hatch between the International Space Station and pressurized mating adapter number 2 is now closed. The Dragon hatch was closed at 10:05 p.m. Central Time, 11:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Just about 2 minutes ago at 10:26 Central, 11:26 p.m. Eastern, the station hatch also closed, and that sets the stage for the vestibule depressurization and final leak checks at the docking interface. Another perspective of Nick Hague and Aleksandr Gorbunov. Butch Wilmore is to Gorbunov's right. Essentially, you're looking over the shoulder of Suni Williams, who's in the far left seat, if you will, in the seating configuration on the Dragon Freedom.
Freedom SpaceX on the big loop. You have a go for procedure 4.011. We'll meet you in section 2 when ready.
Freedom copies, go for 4.011, see the tip, and we'll press through section 1. We'll check it with you in section 2.
The crew closing their visors in advance of the individual leak checks on their suits.
Station Houston on the big loop for Ann prior to hatch close.
ISS.
And taking a look at stowage and PMA3 currently, we are seeing the APAS hatch cover, and we need that to go into the 0.5 CTB for DMAC.
Okay, we will put the hatch cover into the half CTB.
Thank you.
That conversation between Capcom Tess Caswell here in Mission Control and Ann McLean in your field of view, the Dragon Endurance Commander.
We are ready to pressurize.
As she checks the integrity of the hatch interface on the station side, the station hatch is closed. That's the androgynous docking adapter hatch. One more hatch has to be closed. That's the one between Harmony and the vestibule to International Docking Adapter 2. Meanwhile, leak checks now are beginning on the 4 suits of the Dragon Crew-9 passengers aboard the Dragon Freedom. The suit leak checks are underway. This should only take a minute or two.
And the Houston station on 2, checking for step 7.4.
TOC, you are go to deploy desiccant in 7.4.
Copy, go for 7.4.
SpaceX Freedom, we've got 4 good suits.
Freedom, we see the same 4 healthy suits.
And that call by Dragon Commander Nick Hague confirming that all 4 suits of the departing Freedom crew members have checked out, good leak checks on the suits, good integrity on those suits. So we now have set the stage for the undocking of the Dragon Freedom and the Crew-9 crew members just about 1 hour and 24 minutes from now. Just to recap, Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore accompanying Commander Nick Hague and Roscosmos cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov for the ride downhill and a splashdown off the coast of Florida on Tuesday afternoon. We will be resuming our coverage, joined not just here at the Johnson Space Center but by our colleagues in Hawthorne, California at the SpaceX Control Center. We will be back on the air just over an hour from now at 11:45 p.m. Central Time, 12:45 a.m. Eastern Time for the undocking of the Dragon Freedom and the Crew-9 crew from the International Space Station. The weather conditions off the coast of Florida and the splashdown sites continues to be good, with splashdown of Williams, Wilmore, Gorbunov, and Hague scheduled for Tuesday afternoon at 4:57 p.m. Central Time, 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time. So with the Crew-9 crew strapped into their seats and good leak checks for their suits on the Dragon Freedom, we'll sign off for now, and we'll be back with you just over an hour from now for our undocking coverage. For now, we'll sign off. This is Mission Control Houston.
has started. Roger, 0G, I feel fine. Godspeed, John Glenn. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility, we copy you on the ground. New possibilities are opening up for scientific cooperation between countries. 1-0-0, liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower. Discovery, go and throttle up. Discovery, roger, go for deploy.
Thanks, Karen, and to everybody in the shuttle program. The crew is go for launch.
Roger, nice to be in orbit.
We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
It's March 17th, and we're joining you today from SpaceX in Hawthorne, California. We're following along with the Dragon Freedom spacecraft as we await Crew-9 beginning its 10:05 p.m. Pacific, 1:05 a.m. Eastern departure from the International Space Station, with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Suni Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov. I'm Veronica Foreman, a senior sales manager here at SpaceX.
And I'm Sandra Jones with NASA Public Affairs and Communications. It is so great to be back here.
It is really great to have you back, Sandra. And of course, thank you to everyone tuning in to watch live coverage of Dragon completing its 9th crew rotation mission to the space station through NASA's Commercial Crew program. Crew-10 arrived on station on Sunday, March 16th at 12:04 a.m. Eastern. That's March 15th for those of us here in the Pacific time zone. And they will be taking over for Crew-9, who are now headed home.
That's right, and Crew-10 did launch just a few days ago on March 14th with NASA astronauts Anne McClain, Nicole Ayres, JAXA or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. They've spent a couple days in space, with those days docked to the International Space Station being what we call a handover period, where they learn to live and work on station from the crew that's about to leave. Now, the returning Crew-9 members today are NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Suni Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov, which you see on your screen right there. Suni and Butch spent 285 days on the International Space Station, where they conducted over 4,500 orbits and traveled more than 121 million statute miles. Nick and Aleksandr spent 170 days on the International Space Station, conducting over 2,700 orbits and traveling more than 72 million statute miles.
The crew is currently suited, and the Dragon and station hatches are both sealed in preparation for Dragon's departure. Once Dragon departs the station, the crew's flight home is expected to last just around 17 hours. Shortly after separation, Dragon will use its Draco thrusters to move away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers, also called departure burns, to increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. Dragon will also execute a phasing burn to lower its orbit and line the spacecraft up with its landing location. Following phasing, Dragon will complete deorbit, re-entry, and splashdown. During the deorbit sequence, several events occur, including trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, deployment of the drogue and main parachutes, and finally splashdown. Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of Florida on Tuesday, March 18th at approximately 2:57 p.m. Pacific, 5:57 p.m. Eastern, where it will be picked up by the SpaceX recovery vessel Megan, and our recovery teams will help to egress or exit the crew from the Dragon spacecraft.
And today on board the International Space Station is the Expedition 72 crew, being led by the current space station commander, Aleksandr Gorbunov of Roscosmos. Last week, NASA astronaut Suni Williams handed over command of the space station to him ahead of her upcoming departure today. Also on board space station is NASA astronaut Don Pettit, as well as cosmonauts Aleksandr Gorbunov, Yvonne Wagner, and of course, the recently arrived Crew-10 astronauts. Now, just like its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board. NASA astronaut Anne McClain helped the crew.
Freedom, SpaceX on the Big Loop. Final reconfigurations for undock complete and nominal. Houston and Hawthorne teams have pulled go for undock sequence start at 0500 Zulu. I'm looking for you to confirm visors down and crew are ready for undock and departure at the planned time.
And we did just hear confirmation that the team in Mission Control and the team in Hawthorne did pull go for undocking. We might hear some continued communications.
Freedom. Visors are down, and we are go for undocking at the same time.
SpaceX copies. Crew are configured for undock.
And so that was the voice of NASA astronaut Nick Hague, who is the commander of Dragon, giving the confirmation that they heard the go. So good news, we are continuing to progress down the timeline today for an undocking at 10:05 p.m. Pacific time here in Hawthorne. Now, Mission Control in both Houston and Hawthorne will be backing them up today as we step through undocking. And speaking of Mission Control Houston, let's go over to the voice of NASA, Rob Navius at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, to talk a bit about how the station crew have been preparing to send the crew home and what we can expect from here until Dragon departs station. Rob?
Well, thank you, Sandra. It's been a busy morning so far. About 2 hours ago, the 4 departing Crew-9 crew members did gather in the Harmony module right at the passageway through International Docking Adapter number 2, which connects Harmony with the Dragon Freedom. They had a final opportunity to say goodbye to one another, a final opportunity for the remaining crew members on the station, members of the Expedition 72 crew, to take photographs. As you see there, Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore were already suited up in their SpaceX entry suits. Once that was completed and the crew floated back into freedom, Nick Hague and Aleksandr Gorbunov also suited up. Now, just for the statistic freaks out there, we can tell you that Williams and Wilmore, whose mission, of course, was extended. They launched back on June 5th aboard the Boeing Starliner spacecraft. Last August, NASA decided to bring them home on the Dragon Freedom spacecraft with Crew-9. They will come home with a splashdown on Tuesday afternoon with 286 days in space, a mission encompassing 4,576 orbits of the Earth and 121.3 million miles. But just to put it into context, not the longest single space flights in U.S. history. That distinction belongs to Frank Rubio, who remained on the station for 371 days when his Soyuz spacecraft experienced a coolant leak. He's followed on the list by Mark Vande Hei with 355 days, Scott Kelly with 340, Christina Cook with 328, and Peggy Whitson with 289 days in space. So although Williams and Wilmore have in fact had an extended mission, it's not a record-breaking mission. As we stand by for the final procedures to be encompassed here in Mission Control, you're looking at Flight Director Marcos Flores, who is the lead Crew-9 flight director here. To his right is spacecraft communicator Tess Caswell, who will be talking directly to the crew during the undocking phase and during the time that Dragon moves toward the approach ellipsoid, that mythical line in the sand where we complete integrated operations and turn over everything to the folks in Hawthorne to bring Crew-9 home for its splashdown in the Gulf of America on Tuesday afternoon. With that, we'll turn it back to you guys in Hawthorne and stand by for undocking.
Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks so much, Rob. So as you mentioned, we are standing by for separation, which is set to take place here in a little bit more than 10 minutes. We are tracking a 10:05 p.m. Pacific time, 1:05 a.m. Eastern time departure from the space station.
And as we mentioned earlier, just like during its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board. Departure is typically faster and a little bit easier since the crew won't have to stop at any waypoints like we see when a spacecraft arrives to the space station.
Once the undocking sequence is complete, Dragon will use its Draco thrusters to move away from the station in a series of 4 departure burns, which are carefully strategized maneuvers that increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. From there, a phasing burn will place Dragon on a trajectory to align it with the splashdown site.
At the moment, the crew is suited up as they are during what we call dynamic phases of flight. And we did hear a call out a short time ago for the crew to go ahead and put their visors down ahead of the actual undocking itself. Before they depart the International Space Station, let's take a quick moment to get to know the crew we're bringing home tomorrow for the splashdown rather. U.S. Space Force Colonel Nick Hague is your Crew-9 commander. He was selected by NASA as an astronaut in 2013, and this was his second space flight to the International Space Station and third launch overall. He's spent 171 days in space with Crew-9 and has a career total of 374 days in space. During his mission, he completed a spacewalk with astronaut Suni Williams. That was his fourth spacewalk, earning him a career total of 25 hours, 56 minutes of spacewalking time. Before Crew-9, Hague previously served as a crew member of Expedition 59 and 60 back in 2019. He flew with Aleksandr Gorbunov and NASA's Christina Cook, so this is actually his second time sharing the space station with Gorbunov. The Kansas native is a test pilot and distinguished graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. Nick spent 5 months in Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and he voluntarily transferred from the United States Air Force to the U.S. Space Force in 2021. And he is an active colonel. His wife, Katie, is a retired U.S. Air Force colonel, and they have 2 sons.
NASA astronaut Suni Williams is a mission specialist for Crew-9. This was her third visit to the space station. She originally launched aboard Boeing's Starliner spacecraft and arrived at the space station on June 6th. Following the agency's decision to return Starliner uncrewed, she became an Expedition 71-72 crew member. She logged 286 days in space on this mission. Suni has a total of 608 days in space, earning her the ranking of second most time in space by a NASA astronaut. Former NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson ranks first with 675 days in space. Suni conducted 2 spacewalks and has completed 9 over the course of her career, for a total of 62 hours and 6 minutes of spacewalking time. She ranks 4th on the list of cumulative time spacewalking by a NASA astronaut. Previously, she served on Expedition 14 and 15 in 2007, and again with Expedition 32 and 33 in 2012. She is a retired U.S. Navy captain and a proud graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy.
Next up is NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore, who is also serving as a mission specialist today. This is his 3rd space flight, and just like Suni, he logged 286 days in space. He conducted 1 spacewalk and has completed 5 over the course of his career, earning him a total spacewalking time of 21 hours, 2 minutes. He's flown on 4 different spacecraft throughout his career: Space Shuttle Atlantis, Soyuz, Boeing Starliner, and now the SpaceX Dragon. Previously, the Mount Juliet, Tennessee native served on STS-129 in 2009 and Expedition 41 and 42 from 2014 to 2015. Wilmore is also a retired captain in the U.S. Navy.
Aleksandr Gorbunov is the 3rd mission specialist serving on today's mission. Crew-9 was his first spaceflight to the space station, earning him a total of 171 days in space over the course of his career. Gorbunov, along with Nick Hague, saw the arrival of 4 visiting vehicles and saw the departure of 4 as well. The duo orbited the Earth more than 2,700 times. Before his cosmonaut selection in 2018, Gorbunov worked as an engineer for a rocket space corporation and helped support cargo spacecraft launches from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. There is an amazing amount of diversity and experience behind the crew coming home today.
Yes, absolutely. And so we are targeting undocking today at 10:05 p.m. Pacific, just a few minutes here from now. There will be an undock command that is sent first. That is expected at 10 p.m. Pacific time. And then it'll take a few minutes for us to actually see the physical separation and everything. But we are getting views right now of Dragon Freedom. What you see on that black portion of your screen there is some of the solar rays that help collect power for the spacecraft. That will remain intact during the phasing, which is about 17 hours for this particular flight. But before splashdown tomorrow afternoon, which we are targeting at 2:57 p.m. Pacific, that portion of Dragon will actually be jettisoned. So it'll just be the white portion that we'll see splashdown. But we're not quite there yet. First, we need to have the spacecraft undock. So again, targeting undock at 10:05 p.m. Pacific time this evening.
That's absolutely right, Sandra. So right now what we're doing on board Dragon is preparing for that undocking sequence to be commanded. Undocking from the space station basically involves separating the umbilicals and those attachment hooks that we use to dock Dragon to the space station. So we're effectively doing what we did during the docking procedure here, but in reverse. All of that in preparation for splashdown tomorrow.
Freedom, SpaceX on the Big Loop, undock sequence commanded.
And right on schedule, we've got confirmation of that undocking sequence command.
Freedom copies.
Here in Houston in Mission Control, we are now monitoring the demating of the umbilical. This is the mechanism that provided electrical power to the Dragon Freedom during the time it was docked to the zenith or space-facing port of the Harmony module. Originally, Freedom docked at the forward port of Harmony and then back on November 3rd with Williams, Wilmore, Hague, and Gorbunov on board. Umbilical demate reported to be complete. As we stand by for the initiation of the opening of the hooks, 2 gangs of hooks, 12 hooks in all, holding Dragon to the docking port on the zenith side of Harmony. Again, Harmony was the port of call for Freedom initially when it arrived back in September. The forward port itself, it experienced a relocation maneuver with Hague, Gorbunov, Williams, and Wilmore on board back on November 3rd to move from the forward port to the zenith port, a short spin around the block to reposition that spacecraft where it has been mated and docked to the International Space Station since last November. 3.5 minutes away from physical separation. Once the physical separation occurs between Dragon and the docking port on Harmony, it will begin to move above the station at a very slow rate of about 1/10 of a meter per second. Then we'll move behind the station. A series of departure burns will then put it on a trajectory to carry it below the station and on its way to a safe distance away from the International Space Station for its deorbit burn that will occur at 4:11 p.m. Central Time, 5:11 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday afternoon to begin the final leg of the ride home for Williams, Wilmore, Hague, and Gorbunov. Two and a half minutes to go until physical separation. All systems reported to be in great shape. The latest weather forecast off the coast of Florida at the splashdown sites indicates pristine weather for the arrival of the Crew-9 crew on Tuesday afternoon.
Open and nominal.
The first gang of hooks has opened, standing by for the second. Springs on both sides of the docking interface will push off against one another to initiate that opening rate for Dragon. "90 seconds till physical separation. Heading into the home stretch for Williams and Wilmore, the beginning of the end for a 9.5-month mission in space." The interface between Dragon and the International Docking Adapter no longer sealed. The International Space Station and Dragon flying from southwest to northeast across the Pacific Ocean at an altitude of 261 statute miles.
All hooks open.
All hooks are open. And undocking confirmed. Freedom is free of its moorings. Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore begin their belated trip home.
Separation confirmed.
Undocking occurring right on time at 12:05 a.m. Central Time, 1:05 a.m. Eastern Time. Good motion, good stability on Dragon as it backs away.
Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop, depart burn 0 nominal.
Good opening rate reported by the visiting vehicle officer. Dragon's attitude control system functioning as advertised.
And Freedom on the big loop. On behalf of Crew-9, I'd like to say it was a privilege to call station home, to live and work and be a part of a mission and a team that spans the globe, working together in cooperation for the benefit of humanity. To our colleagues and dear friends who remain on the station, Alex and Vapor Top Grill, we know the station's in great hands. We're excited to see what you guys are going to accomplish, and we'll be waiting for you. Crew-9's going home.
Houston Station on the big loop. Step 2, ISS thrusters are verified enabled. To Crew-9, safe journey home. It's been the honor of a lifetime to cross your path up here on Space Station. Your service has been very much appreciated, and we'll miss you, but have a great journey home.
Crew-9, and this is Zach. I wish we could spend more time with you guys, but many people who love you and whom you love are waiting for you. So safe travel, Godspeed.
And for crew arrival, we ring a bell in Navy tradition, and for Crew-9, I did a baritone salute as you undocked.
Love you guys.
So an exchange of poignant words between the Dragon commander, Nick Hague, as well as the Crew-10 crew, the newly arrived Crew-10 crew members, Anne McLean, Takoya Onishi, and Don Pettit, offering their best wishes and Godspeed for a safe return to Earth on Tuesday afternoon for the quartet aboard the Dragon Freedom. Dragon continues an opening rate away from the zenith port of the Harmony module of the International Space Station. Undocking occurring just about 5 minutes ago at 12:05 a.m. Central Time, 1:05 a.m. Eastern Time. Now, coming up here in the next minute or so will be the spacecraft's exit from what is called the keep-out sphere. That is the first imaginary line between the space station and the departure corridor for the Dragon itself. That will be followed by Dragon maneuvering to a Sun communications pointing orientation and to enable better communications between the tracking and data relay satellite system and Dragon's communications capability itself. The approach ellipsoid exit, that basically is the end of integrated operations, where Dragon will cross that imaginary line to move beyond the neighborhood of the station, as it were, is scheduled about 14 minutes from now. The departure one burn now complete, all nominal.
Depart burn 1 nominal. Your go to DOF suits per procedure 4.012, and a final reminder that the big loop will be deactivated following Dragon's exit from the approach ellipsoid.
Copy. We get depart 1 burn, and we are good to DOF suits. That's in work momentarily. We'll expect to go off big loop when we get outside the closer.
That's a good readback, Freedom.
With all the Freedom thrusters operating in perfect fashion, the acknowledgement by the spacecraft communicator in Hawthorne to Commander Nick Hague aboard Freedom that the crew has been given the go-ahead to get out of their entry suits for the time being, get into more comfortable clothing as Dragon continues its traverse away from the International Space Station. This will continue throughout the course of the overnight hours into tomorrow afternoon, a series of pre-programmed maneuvers that will enable Freedom to be in a position for its deorbit burn on Tuesday afternoon. That deorbit burn is scheduled to take place at 4:11 p.m. Central Time, 5:11 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be a 7-minute, 29-second braking maneuver to enable Dragon to slip out of orbit. Its velocity slowed by 53.2 meters per second, enabling it to begin its high-speed entry back through Earth's atmosphere and a parachute-assisted splashdown off the Gulf of Mexico and the Gulf of America at 4:57 p.m. Central, 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time.
Station and Houston, on the big loop, Dragon has exited the keep-out sphere.
Station copies.
Freedom, SpaceX
McLean,
on the big loop.
acknowledging.
Dragon has exited the approach ellipsoid and is on a 24-hour safe free drift path. Configure comm for Dragon to ground in preparation for big loop deactivation. And Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop. Premature call. We have exited the keep-out sphere but are still in the approach ellipsoid.
SpaceX Freedom, come check on the hidden light.
Freedom, we have you loud and clear. How us?
With Dragon having crossed the keep-out sphere, next major milestone will be the exiting of the approach ellipsoid to depart the neighborhood of the station. With that, we'll toss it for the moment back to Hawthorne and Veronica and Sandra.
Thanks so much, Rob. as Rob just mentioned, we are now waiting for Dragon to exit the approach ellipsoid, also known as AE, which is another imaginary shape, this time a three-dimensional ellipsoid measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, in the same family as the keep-out sphere. It's one of several safety zones set up to govern visiting spacecraft, either arriving or departing the station. Before moving into the keep-out sphere or the approach ellipsoid, spacecraft have to be configured where they would not cross the imaginary boundary for a set period of time, even if the spacecraft lost all maneuvering.
That's right. And that approach ellipsoid, once we get past that milestone, will be something that we call the end of integrated operations. And integrated operations means that we are talking to each other on the big loop. So we did hear those communications back and forth. The big loop is essentially not only the crew on the International Space Station, the crew in Dragon, but also both Mission Control Houston and in Hawthorne. Hence the name The Big Loop, because they're all working together to make sure that they have common communications during some of these dynamic portions of flight. So again, we are standing by for approach ellipsoid exit at 10:24 p.m. Pacific time. And on your screen there, we are getting a view of Dragon from the International Space Station, now quite a bit smaller than when we just saw a few minutes ago, undocking at 10:05 p.m. Pacific. Also in the line of sight there, we have a small view of the Canada arm, which is a robotic arm that helps do some maneuvering and is utilized a lot during spacewalks on board the International Space Station. So to recap, the hatches between the International Space Station and Dragon were closed earlier today at 8:05 p.m. Pacific, 11:05 p.m. Eastern. Since then, the crew has settled in and is working to take off their spacesuits for their 17-hour journey back to Earth. The joint NASA and SpaceX teams did, of course, poll go to proceed with undocking, and that undocking command was then sent at 10 p.m. Pacific, followed by umbilical retraction and hooks opening, with physical separation taking place at 10:05 p.m. Pacific, as the Space Station and Dragon were traveling 261 statute miles off the coast of Guam over the Pacific Ocean. Dragon then completed 2 of 4 departure burns and has exited the keep-out sphere, and we are now just minutes away from Dragon crossing the approach ellipsoid to set the spacecraft and Crew-9 up for their path back to Earth. Again, Dragon is targeting to splash down off the coast of Florida in the Gulf at 2:57 p.m. Pacific, 5:57 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, March 18th, marking the completion of a long-duration science and research mission.
Great views right now on your screen of Mission Control here in Hawthorne, California.
It looks like we're starting to get maybe some views there of Dragon as well. These views are being controlled by one of the flight controllers in Mission Control Houston called Cronus, and they help to make sure that the cameras are in position to view not only visiting vehicles that are arriving and departing, but also help to ensure that cameras are in position to get great Earth views, ensure that perhaps if we're flying over a natural disaster like a hurricane or a wildfire, they are ensuring that those great cameras on board the International Space Station are being put to good use to capture all of the science and research that we can aboard the microgravity laboratory. And, you know, fun fact, actually, the International Space Station will be celebrating 25 years of continuous human presence this November. So if you are younger than 25 years old, you have never known a day in your life where there was not a human being living and working aboard the International Space Station.
That is so cool to me. It's just this amazing step forward for human exploration in space.
And with that, we're going to check back in with Rob Navius at the Johnson Space Center one more time. Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Sandra. You mentioned that continuous presence on board the International Space Station. We are approaching the point of the approach ellipsoid exit, which will mark the end of integrated operations with the International Space Station and the flight control team here in Houston. Just a reminder, on board, 7 crew members representing 3 nations: Alexei Ovchinin, the station commander, and his Roscosmos colleagues Ivan Wagner and Kirill Peskov, Anne McLean, Nicole Ayers, and Don Pettit of NASA, and Takoya Onishi of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. Ovchinin, Wagner, and Pettit are next up to depart the station on April 19th. They are scheduled to return home to the steppe of Kazakhstan and a parachute-assisted landing on April 19th U.S. time, April 20th in Kazakhstan. Before that happens, another NASA astronaut, Johnny Kim, along with 2 Roscosmos cosmonauts, will be launching from Baikonur on April 8th as that continuous presence of researchers on board the International Space Station continues unbroken. Sandra?
And thank you so much, Rob, for that update. We really appreciate you joining us here as you spent your evening in Mission Control Houston. Again, we are continuing to get these views following Dragon's undocking from the International Space Station at 10:05 p.m. Pacific time. That sets us up for a splashdown tomorrow afternoon at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time off the coast of Florida. And so we did mention that the crew was busy with a lot of science and research investigations during their time on board the International Space Station. That really is the whole point of the International Space Station, is to conduct science and research investigations, eventually leading to longer duration missions to the moon and then on to Mars.
We're, of course, standing by for any further communications from Crew-9 on board Dragon Freedom at this time. But it's a great opportunity for us to comment on some of the amazing science that Crew-9 conducted while they were on board the station. In total, Crew-9 completed more than 150 experiments, conducting over 900 hours of research. Following their splashdown tomorrow, some of those time-sensitive experiments will be among the first offloaded off the capsule and then returned to various research facilities across the country so that the science can continue.
And in addition to that science, they also completed a few spacewalks, one of which was to actually swab the outside of the International Space Station for microorganisms to see if anything might potentially be able to survive the harsh environment of space, which is pretty interesting. Another one was a spacewalk to remove a radio frequency group, or the RFG. NASA astronaut Suni Williams was able to successfully remove that, which was a big milestone for NASA. And as you mentioned, over 530 hours specifically dedicated to NASA science between NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams. So that just goes to show the great use that the microgravity lab has for science and research on the ground.
I still can't get over that fact that you shared that it has been almost 25 years of continuous operation on board the ISS. That's amazing.
Yes, over 270
Station
people.
on 2 for PMA3 closeout photos.
Go ahead, Ann.
I just downlinked the card with all of the PMA3 and IDA and Dragon Hatch photos, as well as Crew-9 departure. Those are on SSC 17.
Copy, 1-7.
And just want to clarify, also on 17, I did a whole series of kind of inspection documentation photos before departure, and then a series after departure per the instructions. So 2 different folders with before and after photos.
We copy.
And that was the voice of NASA astronaut Ann McClain, who is still on board the International Space Station, stepping through procedures with the ground to wrap up after undocking, taking some photography of the hatch that the team on the ground will inspect, make sure everything checks out just fine. So we are awaiting the confirmation that Crew Dragon Freedom has exited the approach ellipsoid. We're expecting that here in just a couple of seconds here, really. So we might hear that call out here shortly.
And again, if you're just joining us, the approach ellipsoid is a 3-dimensional ellipsoid measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers in the same family as the keep-out sphere. One of the key differences with the AE is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory, which means that the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours again, even if it lost all maneuvering.
That's exactly right. So we'll continue to stand by for that. Now, you may be wondering, what will the crew be doing during their 17-hour phasing? You did hear the call out earlier that they had to go to doff or take off their spacesuits. So they'll get settled in, have the opportunity to have a meal, and try and get some sleep before their targeted splashdown off the coast of Florida tomorrow afternoon at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow afternoon. So we are looking forward to seeing them splash down off the coast of Florida tomorrow. So continuing to stand by for that approach ellipsoid exit. Should be hearing the call out any moment now. And that will really end the portion of integrated operations between the Space Station, Dragon, Hawthorne, Mission Control, and Mission Control Houston as well.
Freedom, SpaceX on the Big Loop. Dragon has now exited the approach ellipsoid and is on a 24-hour safe free drift path. Please make sure that comm is configured for Dragon to ground.
And SpaceX Freedom on Dragon to ground. Understand we're out the approach ellipsoid, 24-hour free.
Good confirmations there, both from Mission Control and Dragon.
And again, we did hear confirmation that Dragon Freedom has now exited the approach ellipsoid, or AE, which is that imaginary shape that's three-dimensional ellipsoid measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers in the same family as the keep-out sphere. So one of the key differences with the AE is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what we call that 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. This means that the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours, again, even if it lost all maneuvering.
With that, Crew-9 has officially departed the International Space Station. As Sandra mentioned, it will take them about 17 hours until they make their way back to Earth. So the crew is currently settling, as Sandra mentioned, for a little bit of dinner, maybe get their suits off before they take some time to rest before returning to Earth. Dragon is, of course, targeted to splash down off the coast of Florida tomorrow at 5:57 p.m. Eastern, 2:57 p.m. Pacific on March 18th, followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by a SpaceX recovery vessel. As they rest up, our teams here will continue to keep an eye on the weather to ensure a safe return for Dragon and our Crew-9 astronauts.
And though our coverage here in Hawthorne today is wrapping up for now, we will turn it over to the NASA team in Houston to take us through the next phases of the Crew-9 mission. Our friends at the Johnson Space Center will provide continuous live audio-only coverage along Crew-9's journey home until we rejoin tomorrow. You can find the audio-only link by visiting nasa.gov/live and clicking the mission audio link, or by searching for NASA Mission Audio Live Feed on YouTube at go.nasa.gov/live ISS.
Meanwhile, we'll rejoin you for live visual coverage starting roughly 1 hour prior to splashdown at 1:45 p.m. Pacific. As always, you can find mission updates on X at NASA, at SpaceX, and on the web at nasa.gov. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you and our Crew-9 astronauts soon.